Hi, I'm Sarah Olson, and I'm going to present the findings of my research into the impacts of an authentic science Upward Bound summer program. Upward Bound is a federally funded college preparedness program for first-generation and low-income high school students. To start, a little background. Not all students are succeeding in science due to barriers. However, research suggests that barriers underserved students face in traditional science education may be overcome through more authentic science experiences outside of the formal school setting. Specifically, when underserved students develop science identity, science self-efficacy, and science community values through participation in authentic science experiences, they're more likely to persist in science. However, despite understanding the importance of these factors, we lack evidence describing how they are developed, and that is the purpose of this research. The 3-week Upward Bound summer program featured field-based science experiences with researchers, student-directed projects addressing a community issue, and mentorship by graduate students in science fields. 16 students participated. 10 students were interviewed, and the data was coded using both in vivo and a priori codes. The first finding was that students felt like a science person when they were actively doing and teaching science in an authentic context. On the left are the activities students were participating in when they felt like a science person. The x-axis represents the frequency, and not every activity we did showed up in a student response. So this gives us an idea of the types of experiences that were most impactful. The colors are the science practices, shown a different way on the next slide. Here we can see the practices that most made students feel like a science person. Testing water quality and explaining were most impactful. For example, when they were teaching water quality to younger students at a Coeur d'Alene Tribal Lake celebration. The second finding was that students felt emotional and intellectual safety during the program, which allowed them to try on a science identity. Here's a word cloud created in vivo with my code, intellectually and emotionally safe environment. The safe space created in the program allowed students to feel like their ideas were valued and accepted and contributed to an overall sense of belonging. The third finding was that students valued science when they were able to contextualize it in their everyday lives. Here's a quote from the data. I remember doing pH in elementary school, I think, a little bit, but I hadn't gone that in depth with water testing, and so looking at the different ways to test water quality was really interesting. I think it helped me realize, because people talk about Flint and water things that can harm you, it made me realize there can be really bad things in our water, and so it's good to test them when you can. So here the student is connecting the water quality testing to previous experience, to current events, and to future applications. By putting that learning into context, the student now values it in a new way. Lastly, there were several barriers for students to pursue science that came up in the data. When asked if they thought they would make a good scientist, students would describe certain fixed qualities they thought were necessary to be a scientist, such as a good memory or the ability to hyper-focus. This fixed mindset is a barrier for students who don't feel they possess those qualities and don't have a growth mindset, which is more prevalent for students in poverty. Next, some students felt it was necessary to be passionate about a specific topic in order to pursue it, which might keep them from trying it out. And lastly, some students describe science as abstract and vague, with few obvious entry points for them. I present here some implications of this research that apply directly to the STEM Access Upward Bound program at the University of Idaho, but could easily apply to other outreach programs with similar goals. For example, National Science Foundation funded broader impacts projects geared towards similar student populations. Important findings were that science identity is developed through actively engaging in science practices in an authentic context. Teaching appears to be especially impactful for developing science identity. Real-world science experiences outside the classroom help students to value science more and see the relevance to their lives. And creating an emotionally and intellectually safe environment is crucial for students to develop science identity. These findings, potential strategies for addressing barriers. So emphasizing a growth mindset in relation to becoming a scientist. Science professionals engaging with students must share their own growth and continuing challenges. Expose students to a broad swath of science career paths, emphasizing that passions grow with interest, and passion is not a prerequisite. And lastly, remind students that they are doing science whenever they're doing it. Be specific about what science is. Address misconceptions. For For example, some students are unsure whether the medical field is science. These findings will all be applied directly to a guide for researchers collaborating with Upward Bound, which will help to develop the types of authentic science experiences that are most impactful for student persistence in science. Thanks for listening.